It's my pleasure to introduce Lee Badgett.
Okay. And feel free to give me the same hook or whatever that's necessary. Well, I also want to thank Eric and Joe and for organizing this, and to Rodney for inviting me in the first place. It's been a really fascinating couple of weeks and a crash course in Australian politics, and I've learned a lot from the visit. I guess Boris is I'll just pick up where he sort of left off to a certain extent. Once the Netherlands allowed same-sex couples to marry, it became an inevitable magnet for people like me who were interested in what would actually happen. I'm an economist by training. I had a sabbatical coming up. I thought, oh, I've written a little bit about gay marriage in terms of the economic impacts. Let's go to the Netherlands and see, what else we can learn. So my wife, now partner then, Elizabeth Silver, and I were there in the Netherlands when our home state, Massachusetts, had a very surprising announcement from our highest court that said that same-sex couples also have the right to marry in Massachusetts. So we became the first state to allow same-sex couples to marry. But there was a window of about 6 or 7 months where that was a little bit up in the air. There was sort of an implementation period built in. So this huge debate broke out in the United States. And from sitting in Amsterdam, I realized that actually a lot of the questions that were being asked there had been asked in the Netherlands and have actually continued to be asked in almost every debate about that in the United States and in the other countries that have asked whether or not same-sex couples should marry. And it really is the question that Rodney spoke about, which is, what happens? What happens? Will the sky fall, or will everything be wonderful? On a day where the sky is kind of falling out there, I guess that's maybe this will be an hopeful, optimistic note. As Boris mentioned, there are 10 countries now that offer same-sex couples the right to marry, and it's interesting to note on that globe up there, just coincidentally, the sort of dark side of the globe is where we are now, and that's where there are no countries that allow same-sex couples to marry. But there are countries on 4 other continents that do. In one of those other countries, there are at least some places that allow same-sex couples to marry. In the United States, now 7 states, plus the District of Columbia, allow same-sex couples to get married. There are 2 others that just in the last few weeks have passed, and governors have signed legislation that would allow same-sex couples to marry, but it's going to actually have to go to a vote of the people in those states before those get implemented. So we actually have in the United States 50 to 80,000 couples who've gotten married. Adding that to the thousands of couples in the Netherlands and the other countries who've gotten married, we actually have a fair bit of experience now to know what might happen. So in thinking about that, I want to start with the couples themselves and the ones obviously who get married. When you ask couples, same-sex couples, why they get married, it sounds very familiar, culturally speaking. They get married because they want to express love and commitment to the person that they're marrying. They want to do it in front of their friends and family members because that's what is significant about marriage. It's not just an agreement between 2 people. It's actually something that everyone in the family is a part of. Often they get married because they want to have a child or they want to buy a house. That's also a long-term commitment to your bank as well as to the person that you're buying it with. But having a child obviously is something that's also very important to people. On the economic side, I'll come back to economics at the end, but there is a legal framework about marriage that's very important that people are interested in. And in the United States, at any rate, there are lots of important benefits that you get as a result of being married. For instance, you're much more likely to have health insurance because of our kind of odd health insurance system. Hopefully that will be getting better in the near future, but right now, if you're married, you have 2 shots at getting health insurance from your employer. So same-sex couples are talking about getting married for the same reasons. And I don't think there's anything surprising about that, but I think it is significant because it suggests that same-sex couples are thinking about marriage really in the same kind of way that different sex couples are, and that's important for the rest of the story that we'll come back to in a second. The second thing that's important to notice, I think, is that same-sex couples report many positive effects of being allowed to get married. Some of it is a very profound sense of social inclusion that they had not experienced before. They suddenly feel normal in lots of ways. Even same-sex couples that I interviewed in the Netherlands who actually didn't like marriage very much and had chosen not to marry, they were very grateful to have the right to marry because it did make them feel like they were full members of society. In Massachusetts, we did a survey asking couples about more direct effects that are also important that you can see up on the bar chart here. For one thing, families are much more accepting of partners once they are spouses of their son or daughter or brother or sister. And that is something that is often surprising to people because they've been in relationships for a while before they get married, if they're same-sex couples, because they've been waiting for the right to marry. And they may have had some acceptance of their partner by their families. But when they get married, they cross that line, something happens that changes who that person is in ways that are obvious to the same-sex couples. On a personal level, they often find that they feel more committed or more responsible to their partners. That's the second bar down there. That's about 3/4 of the couples. It's actually not that the other quarter doesn't feel more committed. They basically just felt very committed already and didn't feel more committed. And then the last part kind of captures another element of that sense of acceptance within the community. So you can see the effects kind of spreading out from the couple themselves to each other in the context of their community, their family members, and also their kids if they have them. In the United States, 20 to 25% of same-sex couples are raising children. It was 25% in our survey in Massachusetts. And people reported that their children were better off as a result of having married parents. I just want to make sure that it's clear that it's not that the children raised by gay and lesbian people are somehow disadvantaged. We have decades of psychological research that shows that actually they're quite well off, quite well adjusted psychologically, educationally. All the important outcomes for kids are very good for kids raised by same-sex couples. But marriage actually provides something else. It provides a sense of security. It provides a sense of normalcy for the children. It provides a way for them to explain their families to other people. They are suddenly now like other families when they have married parents. The same-sex couples who are their parents say that marriage actually gives them an additional and important tool to be good parents, which is the ability to better negotiate with teachers and schools, with the kids' pediatricians, with the parents of their children's friends. Again, that all of those people now understand those families headed by gay and lesbian people in ways that they did not before the gay couples had the right to marry. And that overall is good for kids because, as I said, it gives them that sense of greater security and sense of normalcy. So the impact on children is very important. I want to come back to this question about social inclusion for a second, because this starts to get at that question about, what will happen to heterosexual people if gay couples can get married. Just to look at what the reactions are of heterosexual people when their gay kids can get married or their friends can get married. And Boris has noted that how easily accepted it was. When I was in the Netherlands and interviewed couples, I got some great stories about how heterosexual people very easily integrated the idea of marriage. Now, it's not that all parents, for instance, mothers in particular, were totally thrilled when their gay or lesbian kids said they were going to get married, even though they may have been supportive. For instance, Rachel and Marianne, a couple that I interviewed, had dinner to tell Rachel's mom that they were going to get married, and she said, No. I'm supportive of your relationship, but marriage, no, you don't need to do that. What am I going to tell my friends? I'm going to tell them you're getting married, and they're going to say, oh, who's her husband going to be? And I'll have to say, she's marrying a woman, and I just don't want to have to do that. So she was very upset by this, and they didn't really know what to do. So they all, said goodnight, and the mother went home and said, all right. And she got on the phone and called some friends, and the first friend said, she said to her friend, well, I just found out my daughter's getting married. And the friend said, oh, that's great. That's wonderful. You must be very happy. She said, well, not really, but yeah, maybe. So she called another friend and had said the same thing. My daughter's getting married. The friend was very excited, knowing, her daughter was going to marry a woman. Didn't matter. She was very excited. Finally, after the third friend gave the same reaction, Rachel's mother said, maybe this isn't so bad after all. Maybe I could deal with this. Maybe even I can, kind of become comfortable with this. And she became very supportive and helped them pay for the wedding and helped them plan the wedding. So parents sometimes, even though they're initially resistant to the idea, were able to see their kids as people who ought to get married, even though they were in same-sex relationships. And sometimes they were helped out by the larger community. On the flip side, Mary Ann's grandfather once spent an entire evening trying to convince them that they should get married. This is something that gay people are not very used to experiencing. But her grandfather said, your grandmother and I have been married for many years, and it's been a very wonderful thing, and you have the right to marry, so why wouldn't you want to take advantage of it? And over time, he kind of started to make sense to them. And when I talked to them a couple of years later, they pointed to that event and said, that's when we really decided that we did want to get married. So again, heterosexual people are adjusting how they see same-sex couples and are becoming much more accepting of them as people who actually not just can get married, but should get married. And I think that's a very important piece of evidence about how easy and possible it is to integrate same-sex couples into the institution of marriage. Other stories, involve people reminding their gay friends, no, you can't call her your girlfriend anymore. She's your wife now. So you have to use that term, or reminding them of their anniversaries or other kinds of events that are about marriage that same-sex couples see reflected back, the fact that that marriage is not just something about them, it's not just something about their relationship, but it's something that the whole community has a stake in. And in the Netherlands, it's quite clear that the whole community sort of feels like it has a stake in same-sex couples and their happiness. So the social inclusion piece, I think, has some really important evidence about the fact that the sky is not going to fall. I'll come back to that again in a second, but before I move on, I do want to say something about marriage, the M word. It's not just civil unions with a different label. It's quite clear that registered partnership or civil unions, domestic partnership, whatever you want to call it, is seen very differently, both by same-sex couples and in at least some of these cases by heterosexual people. The emotional value, the social value that people feel when they take on that relationship and see it reflected back by heterosexual people is something that doesn't happen with civil unions. And I don't think that's surprising, really. Marriage has been around for a very long time, thousands of years. It has accrued a great deal of social importance and social and cultural meaning that is just not going to be there for a status that was created last year or 10 years ago even, or in the case of Denmark in 1989. It's something that people don't really understand. You always have to explain it to them. But marriage is something, as one person put it that I interviewed said, is something even a 2-year-old will understand. On the other hand, in the Netherlands, the registered partnership came to be seen by many couples as something that was what they said was a bit of nothing, something that was a political compromise on the way to getting married, but really didn't have the same kind of meaning other than to set off same-sex couples who only had access to registered partnership in the Netherlands as being different, as being second-class citizens. In the United States, this has happened over and over again. We're sort of starting to do a little bit of research on this, but it's clear that same-sex couples who only have access to civil unions also see themselves as being treated as second-class citizens when they don't have the full right to marry. It's not just about the legal rights and benefits. It's really about the much larger social meaning of marriage. And just to give you a sense of why I think I know that civil unions are seen very differently by same-sex couples, you can just look at what we call the take-up rates. This comes from the United States and states that have the right to marry for same-sex couples. And what we saw is that in those states, 30% of same-sex couples got married in the first year they had that option. If they live in a state where they only have civil unions as an option, though, only 18% of those get married in the first year. And if it's something that has even fewer rights and benefits than civil unions that are trying to replicate marital rights and responsibilities, these more limited statuses attract even fewer people. So what we see is same-sex couples, at any rate, voting with their feet to say, marriage is what we want. It's what has meaning for us. It's not just about the legal rights and benefits. So again, in this way, same-sex couples, I think, are also saying that they are, again, treating marriage like different-sex couples do. When different-sex couples have these same options, the patterns are even more different. Same in the Netherlands, actually, a very small percentage of different-sex couples choose to get into registered partnerships, even though they have that option. And we see that in other countries as well, and in the U.S. as well, where there's some states where different-sex couples are allowed to the option of civil unions, and they're just minuscule rates. So everybody prefers marriage. So I guess the question, to kind of come back to the will the sky fall question that Boris has noted, that has emerged in many of these debates. Let me just say just a couple of words about this, because it does come up. Let's just say at best, the people who make this argument point to trends in behavior by heterosexual people. They make it look like maybe when same-sex couples get rights that heterosexual couples change what they do. So some journalists in the United States have made this argument and pointed to Scandinavia and said, you know, you want to know what's going to happen? If gay couples get the right to marry, here's what's going to happen. It's going to be like Scandinavia, where they destroyed marriage. So they point to trends in things like the rates of non-marital births amongst women who have kids. And you can see, in fact, big increases over time in the percentage of babies born to mothers who aren't married. But what they don't, let's see, there's one more arrow that goes up there. Those arrows, though, actually show you when gay couples got rights to registered partnership for Denmark and Norway, and registered partnership in the yellow line is for the Netherlands. So you can see both where the registered partnership line comes in 1998, and then in 2001, when same-sex couples got the right to marry. There's no change in the trend. What a lot of these commentators are pointing to is the fact that marriage has changed, but the people who changed it were the heterosexual people who were getting married for many years. And in many cases, I think a lot of us think those changes were good things, where men's and women's roles have converged, where people have the option to get out of marriages if they're not good ones, in terms of divorces, and the removal of lots of other kinds of restrictions, like in the US, the bans on interracial marriage that kept people from being able to marry the person that they love. The last one is with regard to same-sex couples. But anyway, so marriage has changed, but it's changed for the good, or if you think that these trends are bad, it's been changed by heterosexual people, not gay people. So no harm has resulted overall. We don't see changes in heterosexual behavior. We see same-sex couples choosing to marry for the same reasons that same-sex couples do, and seeing and being seen by heterosexual people as people who ought to get married. So the last thing I want to just mention is something that Rodney alluded to, which is the economic impact of allowing same-sex couples to marry. And I'm just kind of looking at it from a very simple perspective, which is that people spend a lot of money when they get married. It's a big day. And so people spend lots of time planning weddings, and I think you actually have to plan for a long time to spend a lot of money. In Massachusetts, we gained $111 million in the first 5 years from in-state couples' weddings. And so that has been an economic boost there. So what would happen in Australia? The ABS reports that there are at least 33,000 same-sex couples in the US. 54% would marry, according to a Queensland University study. That means we're looking at about 18,000 new weddings. 18,000 people, 36,000 people going out there and buying new clothes for their wedding, and hiring photographers and renting restaurants and doing all sorts of things that are going to cost them a lot of money. Now, how much would they cost? The average spending in Australia is $36,000. Let's just say maybe same-sex couples wouldn't spend quite that much, or maybe not all of it would be new spending. So we'll take just a conservative estimate of 25%, which is about $9,000, and you're talking about $161 million over the first few years that same-sex couples could marry. And actually, that's a pretty conservative estimate. It could be a lot more. It might be more same-sex couples. More of them might marry. They might spend more than we're assuming in this very conservative estimate. They might come from New Zealand. They might come from other countries. They might invite friends and family. So there's all sorts of scenarios under which they could actually spend far more than that. Now, I will just say, I'm not sure this is the best reason to allow same-sex couples to marry. But it does add to the clear set of evidence that suggests that that there's nothing bad that's going to happen to anyone. And really, you could look at it as saying that everyone will gain. Same-sex couples, their kids, their families, and the people in the communities and economies around them will gain from being allowed to marry. And I think that is the lesson that we can draw very clearly from the United States, from the Netherlands, and I think as more research gets done, we'll see the same things have happened in other countries and hopefully someday here in Australia. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lee. So it's over to you for questions, or you might want to make a brief comment. We're not really open to more speeches though, so just keep them a little bit succinct. As a courtesy, if you're happy, it'd be quite nice for you just to introduce who you are very briefly, just name or whatever, and to whom you want to direct your question. And please feel free to ask Rodney, put Rodney on the spot as well if you want some Australian perspective on it.
Hi, I'm Danielle. Lee, I'm just wondering what your experience was talking to the Australian politicians and taking those facts and figures to them, which you said isn't necessarily the best argument for gay marriage, but it is a new one.
Well, it was interesting. I think a lot of them seemed very interested in it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. They were interested. Some of the folks who were already in favor thought that this was an interesting additional argument that they could use in trying to persuade other people. And I think for some of the members of Parliament who kind of have an orientation towards thinking about markets and businesses, that was also fairly positive. But I think people also were interested in hearing about the other side for families, and a lot of people said that makes sense. I get that that could be very important. And I definitely got the sense that they like to hear from the places that had already seen this happen, and whether that will change their minds or not. In some cases, we were talking to people who were not in favor of marriage equality, but it certainly was making them think and talk about it, which seemed like a very positive thing. Rodney, you were in a lot of these meetings. I don't know if you...
Yes, I had the same impression. Some of the politicians we spoke to are obviously conflicted about the issue, and it was interesting to see how they, how Lee's research stirred up in them this desire to talk more, to know more, and they were sometimes arguing. There were meetings where there were several of them. They were arguing with each other, or sometimes they were just arguing with themselves about what this reform means and what it means for families and what it means for the community, and that can only be a good thing. That Lee's research sparks this kind of debate, particularly, I have to say, amongst Liberals. It was most of the Liberals who really wanted to talk, who didn't want to take the evidence, they wanted to talk about what it meant.
I'd like to add to that I think 2 days ago there was a conference here in the Parliament building of New South Wales, organised by Angelus Morningstar. It was the LEAP conference. There were 5 or 6 politicians from New South Wales, all of them in favour of same-sex marriage, but also from the National Party, the Liberal Party. And what I noticed was that they really get the concept that it's about sharing responsibilities, the bond between two people, and the fact that you cannot have in a country first and second class citizens. So I was really surprised to see that also in the other political parties there are people who genuinely believe, no, it's really time for Australia to make the next step.
Hi, I'm Angelus Morningstar, the person that was hosting the conference that Boris just mentioned. I have a question relating to trans and intersex persons, and I'll just be conscious of the fact that I'm not speaking for them, but raising the issue. I'm somewhat conscious that sometimes discussions around same-sex marriage particularly tends to erase the concerns that trans and intersex people have, particularly when a lot of the discussion around marriage equality tends to talk about normative bodies and normative engagements of relationships. What sort of dialogue do we need to have to ensure that trans and intersex persons are represented within discussions about marriage equality?
Well, in a lot of ways, the practice, the actual achievement of let's just call it same-sex marriage, means that that the sex or gender distinctions no longer really make much of a difference. And I think that at that point, transgender people, intersex people, gay and lesbian people are all able to marry whomever they love without regard to without the creation of a barrier to that. And I'll say, in the United States, honestly, much to my researchers' chagrin, in some cases they've actually removed the sex indications from wedding license forms. So it's possible to kind of completely take out sex from the equation in ways that actually some trans people in the United States have found to be very positive. So in practice, I think it works out to the advantage of everyone to have this law change.
Language in a debate is a bit, or steering language in a particular direction is a bit like steering a ship. It doesn't always go as quickly in the direction you want it to as it should. I remember when the issue first hit the headlines in Australia, there was a lot of talk about gay marriage, and a lot of bisexual and transgender people felt that was discriminatory if they didn't identify as gay. And there was the debate was steered towards the term same-sex marriage instead. And as you've said, there are transgender and intersex people who feel that is discriminatory or doesn't represent their experience. And I'm pleased to see that particularly in the last 3 or 4 months, that the Australian media has really picked up on the term marriage equality. And for that reason, and also because, as Boris said, there's no such thing as gay marriage, there's just marriage. And the term marriage equality represents that best of all. So hopefully we'll continue in that direction.
Well, there is a broader issue, and that is that in the Netherlands, for instance, after we introduced marriage equality, a lot of people thought, okay, now everything is done and we can move on and we don't have to think about discrimination. And of course, there are a lot of transgender people in the Netherlands, for instance, when they want to obtain a new identification document, the law in the Netherlands still requires them to have sex reassignment surgery, and they need to be irreversible infertile. That's still a legal requirement in the Netherlands. So although there is same-sex marriage, there are a lot of issues that we still need to fight for. So what politicians decided to do is to organize a hearing, and we asked the whole LGBTIQQQ community to come to Parliament and to give them, the members of Parliament give us a list of priorities, and then we were able to set a new agenda. So it would be very important also for people here in Australia to realize that after same-sex marriage is introduced, there are still a lot of other issues that needs to attend to.
Thank you.
G'day, my name's Marcus. It was interesting when you spoke about, and I think Boris, this was you speaking about the nature of marriage and its likelihood to change, and you said it's unlikely to change. But I wonder how, if same-sex marriage is legalised, it'll change the relationship status and the lived experience of people who have meaningful, albeit non-dyadic, not capital R relationships, who are in same-sex relationships, and if all relationships are then legitimised in marriage, and it's always a pretext towards marriage as an eventuality, if it's likely to sort of domesticate all relationships in a way, it'll streamline them and everything will become dyadic. And yeah, I wonder if now there's time for a trend to emerge, given that same-sex marriage has been legalised since 2001 in the Netherlands, if there's been a change in the character of same-sex relationships. Is it that people are more likely to stay committed together as a couple for longer because marriage is on the cards, whereas if it wasn't, they're less likely to be committed?
Maybe Lee can answer this better than I can, but as far as I know, because I'm not a scholar in this, but as far as I know, you don't really see that much change because, of course, there are people who do not want to get married when they are in a same-sex relationship. Unfortunately, we have seen the first divorces So when their relationship isn't fulfilling enough, people decide also, to split up and to divorce, like it happens in different sex relationships, marriages. When people have children, of course, we also have an adoption law in the Netherlands, so there are same-sex adoptions possible. People might feel a responsibility towards raising children in a relationship, so it might be, but I don't know, this is just something that comes to mind, but it might be that people feel more responsibility to stay in that relationship because they are raising children, but that's the same in a different sex relationship. So I know a lot of gay men, lesbian women who really do not want to get married, and they are having multiple relationships, short-term relationships. There are a lot of people who are single, and sometimes they are in a relationship and then for years not. And so actually I would say that there is not so much difference in the times before and after the introduction of the same-sex marriage bill. But maybe Lee can help us out.
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of like the broader configuration of same-sex couples and their families, that I don't think we have any real research on that topic. I think though over time that we maybe, so there's sort of two things that are happening that get complicated in terms of making predictions. I mean, one is changes in heterosexuals' marriage behavior, those trends that have been happening for a long time, sort of the declining rates of marriage that all predated gay marriage, and increasing rates of cohabitation. In Europe, in the Netherlands in particular, you can see these trends very clearly. So there are lots of heterosexual people and LGBT people who don't want to get married, and probably won't. So, but now they have the option, so we're going to see some of those couples getting married. On the other hand, there are young people who are going to grow up with the knowledge, as Boris pointed out, only knowing that same-sex couples could marry and knowing that they might have that option to marry a same-sex partner if they're LGBT, and they will, probably be more likely, is my guess, my prediction, they will be more likely to get married than will the existing cohorts of couples that already exist. So I think, so putting those two things together gets very complicated because they're kind of going in different directions. That's probably the best that I can do.
Hi, my name is Simon. Thanks for the presentation so far. It's really interesting. A lot of the people that I talk to come up with that thing of, marriage equality devaluing the institution of marriage. And you have all sort of partly answered this, but I want to just delve a little bit more deeply into that if I can, particularly with the Netherlands that have had this for 10 plus years. The rates, you're saying that the rates of heterosexual marriage are sort of continuing to decline. I had no different, but I had thought that in some areas, maybe this is wrong, that there'd actually been a reversal of the trend of the decline of heterosexual marriages. Do you have any data as to whether heterosexuals seem less interested in getting married now in those countries or jurisdictions that have same-sex marriage?
The rates have sometimes they've declined, some countries they've kind of leveled out. Yeah. In Sweden they went up for a while.
You brought up the graph of children out of wedlock, for instance. Mm-hmm. You brought up that graph, but is there a similar graph showing the rate of heterosexual marriage and what those lines have been doing in the last 30 years?
I have that in the book. I didn't have it in the presentation, but different countries have different trends, and there's actually been a very good analysis of what's happened in the Netherlands, at a very detailed level too, looking at the probability of getting married, and that has not changed in the study that I'm thinking of. It hasn't been published yet, but I've seen an unpublished version. It hasn't changed as a result of either registered partnership or same-sex couples being allowed to marry. The different sex couples are still just as likely to marry as they have been.
I once had a wonderful conversation with a senator in the Netherlands who was from the Christian Democratic Party, and she was adamantly against same-sex marriage while in the Senate because she was afraid that marriage as an institution would devaluate because of same-sex couples getting married. And then a few years later, when we talked about this, she said, well, actually, now that I've seen so many people getting married and they're happy and the relatives are happy and there are children, and you know, there are so many positive examples that I changed my mind, and now I don't understand anymore why I was so afraid of this whole argument that once a new group can enter marriage, then all of a sudden it would be less valuable. Actually, she said, for me, it's a reinforcement of the Institute. And she pointed out to me that she knows people who now, heterosexual couples, who would have chosen for the registered partnership, but who feel that it's now okay to get married because the others can marry too. So there is also this, and of course that will be a small group, but there is also a group that felt burdened by the idea that same-sex couples couldn't enter marriage. Now that they can, they feel it's okay for them to get married. So that's a different group, but that's also happening.
Just to follow up what Boris was saying, we've had civil celebrants go to Canberra to lobby politicians on the issue, and one of the things that they say is that 40 to 50% of the younger heterosexual couples who they marry ask them not to declare in the ceremony that marriage is between a man and a woman because that's offensive to their gay friends. And then, of course, they're told it has to be said. And so they make a statement at the wedding that they don't endorse that and they hope for marriage equality. And some just don't marry. They just say, well, we're not going to get married then. What could possibly demean the institution of marriage in Australia more than that discrimination and the fact that people are so offended by that discrimination that they decide not to marry? I mean, we hear so much from the other side of this debate about demeaning marriage, but really it's that discrimination which does the demeaning. The definition of marriage, imagine if the definition of marriage today was what it was 50 or 100 years ago, when women lost their legal rights when they married and rape within marriage was okay, and Aboriginal people couldn't decide who they married, and the list goes on. No one would want to get married. Well, the same trend is happening here. The discrimination within marriage is turning people off the institution. That's what's demeaning it, not the desire of same-sex couples to commit in marriage.
Hi, my name's Barry. I'm a freelance journalist. Very quick question. With the Liberal Party's stance on gay marriage, you've been talking to various politicians in Canberra. What's the latest on the issue of Tony Abbott allowing a conscience vote?
The latest is that Tony Abbott has said that Liberal Party backbenchers are free to vote for marriage equality if they wish. He calls that a conscience vote. But they don't have what he calls a free vote, which means that front benchers, shadow ministers, for instance, like Malcolm Turnbull or whomever, they can't vote for it. Or if they do, then they would face a sanction of losing their front bench position. That's the current position. And we would hope that by the time this comes for a vote, then the Liberal Party's position would be a bit freer than that it would be possible for all party members in Parliament to vote for it if they wish. And when the debate comes, which will probably be in several months, that's possible, I hope. The thing to say about the Liberal Party is that there's much more support in the Liberal Party and in the National Party than many people realise, or many people assume. There are many members who don't wish to declare their hand because they're afraid of the repercussions at the moment. Or they simply want more time to be able to shore up their position, or they want to make contact with other members in the party who support it as well. I hope that in several months, when this issue comes to be debated, then there may even be enough support for it to be passed. But whether it's passed or not, the vote, I'm sure, will be much closer than many people realise. or assume, and that there will only be a handful of votes in it. That's the situation at the moment.
At this point, I'd like to invite Joe Schofield, our friend and colleague from Catalyst, to wrap up and offer the thanks.
Thank you. I'm not going to say much, but because we're getting some drinks for everybody to come and have a bit more of an informal chat if you'd like to. Thank you so much for coming on a wet and windy night. It's great that it's filmed because I know there's a lot of people that were planning to come along, and I can only assume that the rain has put them off. And thank you to our fantastic panel of speakers. It's been really wonderful and inspiring. And I think, as Rodney said, it's an issue that has gained great energy very quickly in Australia thanks to the work of organisations like his, and it's an issue that I think we can be really hopeful about the next 6 and 12 months of really making a really big difference. And there's been tremendous energy, and I think the contributions tonight have been enormously valuable in taking the issue forward. So thank you to Eric and the Whitlam Institute also, Sandra and Amy, and enjoy a drink if you've got time. Thanks.